Hi, and welcome to MCC at Home. We had our first in-person service back last Sunday, and it was fantastic. So thanks if you came along. I really appreciated your support. It was a whole lot of fun, and from here on in, we'll be back to having in-person services every Sunday, 10 a.m. And again, if you couldn't make last week, we'd love to see you this week or the week after that. Everyone is welcome. This is a bit of a, as in this morning, this is a bit of an historical occasion as well. Because whilst this is MCC at Home, this is the beginning of our second chapter. So we're going to be experimenting a little bit. We're going to be trying a slightly different format. As usual, we'd love your feedback. We hope it's beneficial. We hope it works for you. So please let us know what you think in the comments or reach out via the regular email, Facebook channels. It'd be great to hear how you're finding it. And now, I want to kick off with our first talk. So people can be suspicious or I'd even go as far as skeptical of Christianity and church for a whole variety of reasons. Now I'd be guessing one of the biggest issues people may have without even realising it is a suspicion that churches are institutions of, let's go with conformity. Church is a great place to go for groupthink. It's for sheeple, not people. Are you sick of thinking for yourself and living your own life? Go to church. Go to church and outsource all of that pesky autonomy and independence. In summary, belonging to a church is often equated with giving up the one thing that we first world Westerners hold as sacred. And that, of course, is our freedom. Now, as a bit of a disclaimer, I'm not referring to the idea of freedom in a political/human rights sense. So what I'm not talking about when I'm talking about freedom is the right to free assembly or the right to voting, etc., etc. These basic, fundamental civil liberties enshrined in law are not what I'm going to be referring to when I'm talking about freedom. So I'm not really interested in that today. In this talk, I'll be looking at freedom in our private worlds, if you like. So this is the everyday freedom we have regarding how we spend our time, how we spend our money, how we spend our attention. So I guess you could also refer to this as personal autonomy. To be free often has meant being suspicious of customs, suspicious of traditions, skeptical of parents, teachers, other authority figures, religious institutions, and instead finding it out for yourself. So freedom is the preferred contrast, if you like, to the stifling conformity of 50s middle America, and the risk of ending up looking more like Greg Brady instead of, say, Jimmy Dean. It's losing that kind of freedom that we can often associate, unfortunately, for better or for worse, with religion and church. But today I want to ask, is that really so? And even if it is really so in some instances, should it really be so? Should it be that way? So that's what I want to quickly look at. So where did this idea of freedom come from? And is it really everything that it's cracked up to be? And how does it fit, or perhaps not fit, with church and Christianity? So here we go. Here are a couple of choice examples of definitions, if you like, or summations of this kind of freedom that I'm referring to. And these come from some famous American novelists and philosophers. So the first one, society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood or womanhood of every one of its members. And that's from, of course, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Or as Norman Mailer said, to live authentically, he said, one has to divorce oneself from society, to exist without roots, to set out on that uncharted journey into the rebellious imperatives of the self. The rebellious imperatives of the self. So in 50s and 60s America and beyond, autonomy and personal freedom became sacred, I think it'd be fair to say. And it usually involved rebelling, with or without a cause, or sticking it to the man, or fighting some kind of power. So think of these guys, if you like, to kind of best embody it. James, Jimmy Dean, Jack Kerouac, and Neil Cassidy. the two famous beat poets, famous for, or Kerouac's famous, of course, for writing On the Road. And also there happened to be, as you'll see, the face that launched 1,000 Levi's and made jeans super popular. So fast forwarding to now, we've come a long way. So it seems to me there doesn't seem to be like any risk anymore of stifling conformity, courtesy of religion, or outdated morals or traditions. There's this famous line in The Wild One, the movie The Wild One, where Marlon Brando's character is asked, "Johnny, what are you rebelling against?" And Brando answers, "What do you got?" Now that's a fair question now, right? Like, what do you got? Because there seems to be very few taboos left. Think of tattoos, for example. So when I was growing up, it was pretty much sailors, Russian mobsters, and John Bon Jovi. Those were the only people that had tattoos. But now everyone's got one. When I was young, again, the biggest risk regarding tattoos was mum finding out that you had one. Now the biggest risk is actually running into mum at the tattoo studio, finding out that you're getting the same Chinese symbol for wild spirits somewhere on your body. But still I find that even I've got this strong, almost like residual impulse to be wary of anything that looks like conformity, or anything that may violate my sense of authenticity, of being true to myself, the true inner Matt. And there's still this kind of wary of commitment to a group reflex that I find myself having almost instinctively. I'm wary of giving up some of my power, if you like, and independence to some other authority. What if they abuse it? What if I fall into groupthink? What about if I get boxed and hemmed in? Here's how one author, another American guy called Matthew Crawford, a modern guy, a current guy, he's a philosopher as well as a vintage motorcycle mechanic. He summed it up as this: it is part of our Enlightenment heritage that we are taught to take an intransigent stance against the authority of other people. So my reading of that is that the default, our factory setting, is to be suspicious or even anti-authority. So this sacred sense of freedom can make it hard to commit to any voluntary organisation where there's any kind of hierarchy, leadership, where someone may have a say over us. So this, in this sense, is not just restricted to churches. It's going to erode any trust in and loyalty to a larger group that will have some degree of authority over you. So putting all that together, you could be forgiven, I reckon, for believing that we're both pro-free and freer, if you like, than we've ever been before. That we have more choice, more autonomy than any other time in history. That's, of course, assuming that you live where people like me live, the First World West. And that may well be true in one sense. But I suggest in another, it's actually a bit of a terrible lie. So here are two fairly strong criticisms of that modern notion of freedom. Firstly, freedom now, for us, involves being largely at the mercy of an incredibly sophisticated advertising industry. So some critics have actually labelled it as, or the industry, as choice architects. Choice architects. They have money, they have experience, they have science and psychology behind them. And they've become very adept at pitching at us in ways that builds this kind of false confidence in our power and individuality. So you regularly get told that this thing will give you choice, that this product will give you freedom, that this will provide options, deservedly so, as you're the most important and unique person in the world right now. But of course, this choice, these range of choices, it or they are based on market research. You're going to end up watching and talking about the same TV shows as just about everybody else. Oh wow, you like Game of Thrones too? That's amazing. Netflix has about 1 billion options, but the ones that you'll choose are suggested by an algorithm that probably knows you better than you know yourself. And regardless, like if you slum it with the masses and end up at a drive-through of some big box restaurant on a Friday night, or you think that you're kind of a bit more slightly sophisticated than that because you're going to go with something from, say, Uber Eats. On one level, you, me, we're still being corralled, right? So it's not like we're kind of thumbing through a cookbook at home using our complete autonomy and choosing some kind of challenging, novel recipe that we'll have to go and actually hunt down the ingredients for and then spend hours over preparing it. That's, probably not going to happen. You're still consuming, if you like. We're still consuming. We're not creating. And so many of the consumer, if you like, choices that we're free to make are from that kind of stacked deck, all under the guise of being unique individuals with incredibly creative and novel tastes. On a bad day, my consumer freedom, it goes about as far as a PayPal account and a high-speed broadband internet connection at home. So I'm free to be sold stuff 24/7, even when I'm at my most vulnerable, tired, bored, depressed. So it's nice to think of myself as free selves who have, again, authentic, novel, unique preferences and desires that we have independently kind of come to. And when we are met with this unending universe almost of lifestyle choices and options, we take our pick from those. But of course, that's exactly how choice architects want us to think about ourselves too. So to some degree, if I actually believe that, I'm just playing into their hands. In reality, a lone individual, a me, doesn't have all that much, I think, chance against a long-standing, sophisticated billion-dollar industry. Now that may all sound a bit bleak and perhaps even extreme, but please just consider it, think about it. Because that kind of freedom can end up breeding dissatisfaction. What's the next thing? This whole thing sucks. Can also go about breeding envy. I want the same thing that guy over there has. I deserve that same thing. So that's the first issue, or the first critique, if you like, of our current version of freedom. I'd say it's actually a bit of a smokescreen. It hides a much more kind of shadowy reality. The second critique, I'm not really convinced that we're built to carry that kind of freedom. So with this freedom from tradition, say from religion, from doing it the way that your parents did or society told you to, with all that comes great responsibility. And with the autonomy that we have comes accountability. So the freedom that we think we have to choose who we're going to be, to pick and pursue our respective preferences, this can actually become an absolutely crushing burden, especially in a world which is becoming more and more measurable, if you like, where performance is becoming more and more measurable and quantifiable, and a world that's becoming more and more connected. So it's been put like this, and this again comes from Matthew Crawford. Are you a high performance person? Because in a culture of performance, the individual reads the status and value of her soul in her worldly accomplishments. With radical responsibility comes the spectre of inadequacy, says Crawford. With radical responsibility, the responsibility to choose my own adventure when it comes to life, comes the spectre of inadequacy. So for example, I get up in the morning and I walk to work. And my new smartwatch tells me that I've done 2,400 steps out of the now obligatory 10,000. I then log on to Facebook and see that my last post didn't get quite as many likes as my friends. So of course that makes me worry a little bit. So as a result of the worry, I eat a donut. And then of course I have to enter the donut calorie count into my calorie counter app on my phone and curse the lack of my self-control. Because my calorie count is now higher than the people who I'm friends with on the MyFitnessPal app. And of course, all this worry makes me less and less productive at work that day, which, results in me not being able to get all my most important tasks of the day ticked off on my to-do list. And so, of course, then I start to worry that I'm not trying hard enough in my current role, my chosen profession, compared to my peers in the cubicle next door. And so, of course, I decide to work late as a result. But of course, this means that I'll miss my my weekly quiz night, again, with some of those same friends. And think of all the fun and opportunities that I might miss out on as a result of that. Maybe my work-life balance is out of whack. I could go work late and go to the quiz night. Well, I couldn't work late and go to the quiz night, but that would, of course, mean missing out on going to the gym. And those 10,000 steps are not going to take themselves. Now, this is all just like a little bit facetious, but again, just a little bit. Because the broader point is that a lot of us, and maybe more so the young as a generalisation, are feeling the pressure of having the freedom to define and then realise the good life for themselves, to both define and then realise the good life. But that's in a world that is just rife with possibilities and comparisons. And in that kind of world, how do you deal with the overwhelming, almost paralysing number of options? How do you deal with being the recipient of all those options, and even worse, all that potential, and still failing? Because it's clearly your fault, man. Take some responsibility. How do you then deal with the mundane, the everyday, the kind of trivial, the dull, the boring? That can't be part of the good life, right? Especially when everyone else seems to be having more fun than me all the time, at least according to their social media feeds. The culture tells me that I was free to create a beautiful, extraordinary life. And all I did was live an average one in the suburbs. Fail, as the kids are so fond of saying these days. So there are the two reasons why I think our kind of modern, current versions of freedom and autonomy can be really quite unhelpful. We're not really as free as we think we are, and even if we were, even if that was true, most of us couldn't really handle that kind of freedom for very long without becoming undone and broken and compromised by it. So, what does any of that have to do with Christianity and church? Well, I'd submit, historically, Christians have never really believed that people are free in the sense that I've described, in the kind of popular conception of it. Christianity has always been much more pragmatic than that, and it has maintained that individuals are always going to be influenced by the people, by their fellow creatures, as well as being led to some degree by their own both noble, good, but also self-destructive and unhelpful impulses. So in the book of Romans, chapter 6, verses 16 to 23, the author, Paul, he actually writes about freedom. But he describes it in terms of true freedom over here, which increases, it grows by following God. And so-called freedom, a kind of almost anti-freedom that masquerades as freedom over here, that actually destroys that first true freedom. He says that if we offer ourselves to sin, to the anti-God, the anti-love impulse we have, it'll be the last free thing that we do. So we can think that we're free, but in fact we're becoming more and more enslaved. Much like thinking that we're immune to first-class advertising and the opinions of others. And instead of seeing freedom as something that we can create from scratch and design ourselves, Paul writes of God's freedom, that is, choosing to live God's way and follow God's example, so loving God, loving others, and being self-sacrificial, just like Jesus did. Paul says that choosing that version of freedom, living God's way, from that, true freedom will only increase. And that'll involve freedom from those self-destructive and harmful patterns and lead to true life, true living. So there's freedom there, but it's not unlimited. It's the freedom, if you like, to choose which path you'll take, but we don't have the freedom not to take a path. It's the freedom to decide whose authority you're going to place yourself under. So often, we have this idea, and it's even in churches, that in relation to religion, if you like, we are these cool, calm, and rational individuals that calmly weigh up the evidence and the pros and cons for believing in God or not. And then, after completing our Excel spreadsheet, we decide to make a decision. And we graciously, perhaps, reach out and accept God, who's been waiting for us all this time with bated breath. But here in this book of Romans, the reality is slightly different. We're presented as always serving something. We, in fact, need liberating. And it's not a case of us so much reaching out and accepting God, so much as God has been actively pursuing us. And we can accept or not his offer and means of emancipation from a cruel master. The anti-freedom that masquerades as true freedom. And then we can voluntarily enter into the service of the new master, a good God. Now, in this light, part of belonging to a church is realizing that you're not an independent, sovereign individual, and it's instead intentionally choosing who you're going to allow, which group of people you're going to allow to influence you. So belonging to a church is joining, on one level, a group of people who remind each other and support each other on the path of following the way of Jesus, which again leads to true freedom and life. So this isn't the same thing as asking people to join a cult. This isn't about a big exercise in groupthink or becoming a sheeple. Instead, it's choosing of your own volition to move from a hyper-individualistic culture of perceived but actually false independence to one of interdependence, of informing and being informed by people around you who also have voluntarily entered into that relationship. So it's not like a kind of traditional tribal culture where these ties are forced upon you or where you're completely dependent upon others. Instead, with a church, you voluntarily take that on, and that part is critical. So think about it, please. Hopefully I've convinced you, or gone some ways in convincing you, that none of us are completely independent and autonomous. We're all partly influenced, if you like, by someone or by some people, and that's part of being human. That's partly how we're designed. I'm suggesting that you're conscious and intentional about who you choose that to be, which group you're going to align with. You pick your faith community, if you like. You pick your church. You say that you're voluntarily going to journey through life with them. And you give each other permission, if you like, to shape and influence each other. Let me encourage you as I close. Give it a shot and start small. How small? Maybe as small as just turning up to a Sunday morning meeting regularly. Just show up as a first step. Just be another body in the room. Don't have to say anything, just be there. This itself is a big step. Feel free to join us at 10 a.m. every Sunday at our church, Margate Christian Church. But more importantly, just reach out to any church in your local area. We love to see you. I'm sure the people from other churches would love to see you too. If you've got any questions, as usual, please feed them back. Thanks. Corrie.
Matt.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Very much looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too.
Good. How does being a follower of Jesus make you feel in relation to your freedom, to your liberty? Less free, more free, no impact at all?
Yeah, I think I kind of have two components to this answer.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is that there are times when I feel less free. Mm-hmm. And in those times, I know that that's not actually true, mm-hmm. for one thing. I also have kind of seen that that's the time when I lean with my understanding more towards legalism and less on love and less for God's greatest commandment, which is to love Him and love others. Mm-hmm. And I think the priority of those things is incredibly important.
Yeah.
But no, generally I'd say more free. And the reason for that, again, it comes back to loving God and loving others. And it's, I feel that as a Christian, when I know how dear I am to God, mm-hmm. it gives me the freedom to love other people to a much deeper level than I ever could before I knew God. Based on, it's not that I feel that I won't be hurt,
Yes.
but you can be more vulnerable with people because you know what's true about yourself. You know what God says about you. And so any offence, it just kind of bounces off.
Yeah.
And so the freedom is in just being able to love people to a deeper level. And I think that's awesome.
Okay.
No one loses in that situation, I don't think so.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Thanks for that. So if I've heard you correctly, it's not, so loving people in that regard, I mean, free to love people in that regard is not without its risks.
Yeah.
But if you like, those risks are kind of like they're mitigated to a huge degree.
I think, so I think there's no guarantee of not getting hurt by people, but there's no hurt that is not recoverable.
Yes. You've got a real artistic streak. Do you mind like showing some of your latest work? I believe that sculpting is your thing. This is pretty cool.
I have it in my pocket.
People
I don't
more
know how
social media
wanna...
savvy may have been seen this on Facebook already, but if you haven't, check this out.
Should I just hold it up like that?
Yeah.
Is that...
Yeah, I think it's good. How does that work for you?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Yeah, cool. And so that's I'm going to screw this term up. Is it a pendant? Is that what we call it?
Yeah, it's a pendant.
It's a pendant. Cool. Very good, very good. And if you can't quite make it out at home, or you're watching this on your phone and it's really difficult to make out, that is a Tassie tiger, I believe. Yeah. And you were telling me before, like how much time you put into that roughly? It's a prototype.
It's a prototype.
It's a prototype, yeah.
I'd say I spent about a day sculpting the original, which is made out of polymer clay.
Yeah.
And then maybe like another day's work with a lot of experimenting in between to get it like a mould made and then pour a cast. Mm-hmm. So it's cast in a pewter alloy. Yeah.
Nice. So a couple process there. It's great. And you're going to make what about 25 of those, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then you got some other
some other designs too.
And that is exquisite. Yeah. So obviously, and this isn't like a flash in the pan again, doing this kind of work, having that kind of artistic streak, wanting to express yourself in that way. That's been part of you for a while, right? And again, like you were saying before, you like fair to say you come from a pretty artistic family as well.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, so.
which is great. So I'd be interested to know what you kind of see as the relationship between, let's call it artistry and creativity, and your faith and your belief about God.
Yeah. So that's huge for me. Mm-hmm. Seeing God as the creator is one of the biggest elements of my faith and one of the best ways or easiest ways for me to see God's character, I'd say. And I'm quite outdoorsy as well. So I love going outdoors and just look at trees and look at all of creation and see that that's what God's created, and look at how good it is and how perfect it is and how perfectly it works. So just seeing that God's created that's a reflection of who he is, and that's how I see his character, I suppose. Also, the other thing I was thinking about with this question is, to me it's kind of like, it shows how I'm his child, because it's like a trait he's passed down to me. So it's like, so God's the creator, and he's passed that on to me as a gift for me to practice, just as he practices it. So it's like a personal link to God. It's like, I'm actually your child because we have this shared trait that you've passed on to me. So
that's cool. Yeah, so I imagine, some people maybe would say that that's almost a reflection of being made in his image. And when you're kind of participating in that, like, what do people call it? Al will remember. It's either like creating with a little c, or it's like being a sub-creator. You're kind of, again, you are almost participating in God's nature.
Yes.
To some degree, which must be, like a pretty amazing feeling. Yeah. Like you say as well, yeah. Well, look, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for sharing with us some of your art, and also again answering some pretty some questions that I know weren't particularly easy. So I really appreciate that.
Cool.
Thank you. So each week for MCC at Home Chapter 2, we just want to give a quick shout out or plug to some activity that we've got going on as part of the church that may be of interest to some of you who are watching. This week, we just wanted to give our Playgroup a bit of a shout out. So every Wednesday from 10 to 11:30, so for an hour and a half, we run a playgroup that's made up of people from both within the church and outside the church, local community around the Margate, Kingborough kind of region. And you are more than welcome to come along. So it's open to mums, dads, grandparents, any kind of legal guardian and their kids. And all you got to do is bring along, I think it's $2, so $2 per session, and some fruit to kind of share. There's lots of unstructured play, some structured activities, super friendly environment, lots and lots of toys, good playground, lots of room to run around, etc., etc. And a really nice bunch of people. So if you're interested in becoming part of Playgroup, obviously you don't have to be part of the church, but at least half the people who turn up aren't, and that's completely fine. That's how we like it. Please come along. And I'm going to make sure that we've got Meg, who you may remember from prior MCC at Homes. She's the organiser of Playgroup. Her details for contacts for any inquiries about Playgroup will pop up somewhere here, or here if you'd like to reach out and find out more about Playgroup. But we would love to see you at Playgroup. Thanks.